How Athenians made themselves the enemies of Darius the Great and the Persians, of course. So for a while after Darius had come to power, he didn't even know. He didn't know much about Athenians. Seems like it's a city-state that didn't even matter to him. Really, he didn't concern himself with it. But some events took place, and in the end, Athens became, can describe it as the biggest enemy of Darius when it came to the Greek city-states. It just went up there on the list of the enemies that Darius had to deal with. And this is what happened. So in a previous video, I told you about the guy by the name Hippias, who Darius had seen that he could possibly become a strong enemy, potential threat, and he had persuaded him to go with him to Susa. And I told you how Hippias sent a message to somebody who took over from him. Hippias used to rule a city-state known as Miletus. So in Miletus, when Hippias was persuaded by Darius to go to Susa with him, he told him he liked his advice. A guy called Astagoras took over, and he was the nephew of Hippias. And I told you in that video how Hippias sent a secret message to Aristogoras, persuading him to revolt against the Persians. And his goal was that when the Milesians and other Greeks revolt, then Darius was going to find a reason to send him back home, like tell him, go back home and make those people stop the revolt. Now, that is the thing going on. And then Aristogoras, I told you, starts moving around when he receives this message from Hippias. And I told you that Aristogoras had his own reasons why he wanted to revolt against Persians. He had promised you can call them a Persian governor called Artaphanes, that he was going to share with him some money after they had succeeded going on a mission. That mission failed, and now he had this debt, and he was wondering how he was going to pay Artaphanes. And then he decides maybe the best way to get myself out of this debt is to revolt. So he's thinking about revolting. Then he gets this message from Hippias that he should find a way to revolt from the Persians. Now he starts looking for allies. I've told you that he went to Sparta to talk to a guy known as Cleomenes, who ruled Sparta, and he tried to lay everything on the table, telling him, you see, we've become slaves of the Persians, but if we want, we can so easily defeat them and regain our freedom. But Cleomenes was not persuaded, and he told him, no, I'm not interested. In fact, he refused. Even when Aristogoras tried to pay him, he was telling him, I can pay you 10 talents, 20 talents, 30 talents, 50 talents. He still said, no, I'm not interested. So Aristogoras leaves Sparta and he goes to Athens. Athens was like the second most powerful Greek city-state in that time. So he goes to Athens, he meets the assembly, like you can call it today a parliament or a council of people who rule the city, including, of course, the ruler of the city. And he starts talking to them, and he tells them everything he told the Spartans about how they can so easily gain their freedom from the Persians if they came together as Greeks and organized a revolt, a resistance. They could so easily beat the Persians. But the Athenians agreed with him. They accepted to join an alliance with them. But for their reason was different. It wasn't really the persuasion that Aristogoras or the explanation Aristogoras had put on the table that persuaded them really. For them, they had an issue with a guy who used to be their tyrant, a guy known as Hippias. I've mentioned it before. So after Hippias was removed from power, he left the city and he found somewhere else to stay. And remember, I told you that at some point, Cleomenes wanted to bring back Hippias to be the tyrant of Athens. And in fact, Cleomenes had even tried to find another guy called Isogoras and bring him to be the ruler of Athens. And even the guys who were in charge, one of them called Clisthenes, had been helped by the Spartans to come to power. It is that guy who had organized alongside the Spartans to chase away Hippias from Athens. Now, Hippias is gone, but Hippias is still roaming out there. Hippias goes to Sardis, and Sardis was the capital of an empire that used to be known as Lydia, and Sardis was like now the seat of the Persian governor of the European side, like all that region. Not really European, but what we know today as Turkey, and then the land occupied by the Greeks. He was like now in charge of that region. So Artaphernes is in Sardis, as we call him the governor. Now, Hippias goes to Artaphernes in Sardis, and he uses every tactic he had to persuade Artaphernes that he was ready to make Athens come under the rule of Persians. And all he wanted is for the Persians to take him back to Athens and force the Athenians to accept him back as their tyrant, and then he will make sure that the Athenians will continue being under the rule of Persians. So Athenians hear about his attempts in Sardis, and they send ambassadors to Sardis to talk to Artaphernes. And they tell Artaphernes, please stop listening to Athenians who are roaming out here. Stop talking to them. But seems like Artaphernes had found Hippias useful, and he had bought his argument. He was like, this guy has been a tyrant of Athens, and he is willing to make Athenian be under our rule if we restore him as the tyrant. And it seems like Artaphernes was considering that. So when Athenians sent ambassadors to tell Persians, stop listening to that guy, the message they got back from Artaphernes was, he was basically telling them, I think it's good for you to accept Hippias back as your tyrant. That's what we Persians want or desire. So when Athenians got this message, they were in that state of trying to figure out, what does this mean? What do we do about this message from the Persians? That's when Aristogoras appears. He comes to them, he tells them, we Milesians are planning to revolt against the Persians, and we've done our research. We think we as Greeks, if we come together, we can so easily beat the Persians. We have the wealth, we know how to fight better than them. So he gives them all these reasons. So they say yes. Of course, Aristogoras thinks is his persuasion that worked, but the Athenians had their own reasons why they wanted to revolt against the Persians. So up to this point, Darius doesn't know anything about the Athenians, or he knew very little. It wasn't a city-state that had come under his radar. He wasn't really interested in them. So maybe Artaphernes had not passed this message over to Susa, to Darius, so Darius knows about the things going on in Athens. So the Athenians say yes to Aristogoras, and they tell him they're going to give him ships and an army to join his army, and then they go fight the Persians. So Aristogoras goes back to Miletus, and he puts together an army, and then the Athenian army comes, they join together, and now they're going out for a mission. Aristogoras does not lead this army. He picks, I think it's either a nephew of his or somebody from his family, I think his brother, to lead that army and another citizen, and they leave. Aristogoras stays back in Miletus. This army goes to a place known as Ephesus. It seems like he's at the coast, maybe of what we know today as Turkey, the west. What is that? Aegean Sea, is it called? I think. At the coast, that city was there called Ephesus. So they reach Ephesus, and they come out of their ships. They leave their ships at Ephesus, and then they walk. They now go through land, and they go to Sardis, of all places. It's like the capital of Persia in the west. And they go to Sardis, and they find the city unaware, and they attack. And the Persians were not prepared for them. The Persian soldiers stationed there were not prepared for that attack. They are in chaos and citizen. Nobody knows what is going on. They run, and the Milesians and the Athenians and some other city-states that had agreed to join them, they start. It wasn't intentional. The way Herodotus tells us, it wasn't. It was like there was one soldier who fired. I can call it firing. I don't know whether that's the right word. Like he used his arrow to shoot at something, and this arrow somehow, I think maybe it had a head that was burning, something like that, and it started burning some of the building. Now, turns out the bigger part of Sardis was built. The houses were built using reeds. So reeds, they are dry after a while, of course, and then there is fire. Now, over half of the city burns down, and the Athenians and the Milesians and their other allies, they see this. That was not the intention. In fact, the intention was to kill some Persian soldiers and then to plunder the city and then run away. So the city burns down. In fact, they don't pick anything. They don't get anything of value out of it themselves. So with that happening, they see there is more Persian soldiers coming. They run, and then they take the same route they had taken, and they go back to Ephesus. Now they reach Ephesus. The Persians have now, of course, reorganized themselves, and they've gotten even more reinforcement, and they follow them. They reach Ephesus. They find these guys have gone into their ships. They are about to leave, and the Persians, seems they had their own ships nearby, and they follow these guys on pursuit, and there is some fighting in the sea, and the Greeks are defeated. Many of them are killed. Then a few of the remaining ones run away. Now, after that battle, the Athenians decide they are not interested in continuing fighting alongside the Milesians. They tell Aristogoras, we don't want to fight anymore. You go on with your war with the Persians. We are going back home. We are not interested. But unfortunately, they took this step when it was too late. Because at this point, they've burned down the Sardis, and now they've made Darius their enemy. Now, as they are going back home, a message, of course, goes to Susa, to Darius, to inform him about the attack on Sardis and how everything unfolded and the destruction and what happened. And now Herodotus tells us that, of course, he knew about the Milesians. He was staying in Susa with one guy who used to rule over that city, that is Hippias. Hippias is still in Susa. So he knows about the Milesians. And he's, of course, decided he's going to punish them for that attack. But he calls one of the guys who are in the palace, and he asks them, who are these Athenians? And then he's explained to that these Athenians, they come from Athens, it's a city, and he's told everything about them, of course. And he tells one of his servants to bring him an arrow and a bow. He shoots an arrow to the sky, and he says the following words: "Grant me, Jupiter, to revenge myself on the Athenians." So even though the whole thing was organized by the Milesians, under Aristocras, who was the nephew of Hippias, who is staying with Darius. Seems like Darius was more bitter with the Athenians than he was with the Milesians. I think it's because he knew a lot about the Milesians, but now there is this other city-states that are coming. Now, he tells his servant that every time when there is being served a meal, he should be reminding him, and the words he should be using is master. Remember the Athenians. So it's like, you need to punish them. You need to punish them. So meanwhile, the Athenians have told Aristogoras, we're not interested in fighting anymore. It's no longer our war. In fact, they left, they went back home. Aristogoras continues fighting the Persians. He's organizing these attacks. And then he goes on to find new allies, new cities, new Greek city-states and other tribes. He persuades them to join him. But at this point, even though the Athenians have given up, Darius is coming for them. So, meanwhile, I've told you what happened, that when this revolt started, Hippias was sent by Darius from Susa to come to that region and try to make sure he puts things in order. He promised Darius that he was going to make sure that the Milesians stop the revolt. Of course, that's not what happened. As I've told you in the previous video, he came and he joined the revolt, and in fact he died with that revolt going. Okay, so in the next video I'm going to tell you the events that followed.